April 30, 1943. The southern coast of Spain. The sea is calm, the air heavy with salt and mist. A small fishing boat drifts near the shore of Huelva. The men aboard, locals tired, quiet, see something bobbing in the gray water. At first they think it's driftwood. But as they draw closer, the shape resolves. A human body, face down, arms outstretched, uniform tangled in seaweed. They haul it aboard. The smell of salt, oil, and decay fills the air. It's a man, British by his insignia, still wearing a life jacket, his clothes soaked and stiff. A leather briefcase is chained to his wrist. The fishermen exchange uneasy glances. They've seen wreckage before, bodies even, but never one like this. The man's face is pale, smooth, untouched by injury. His belt, boots, and watch are all perfectly in place. Even the briefcase seems oddly deliberate, intact, secure, locked. They tow the body back to shore and report it to the local authorities. Word travels fast. By afternoon, Spanish naval officers have sealed off the beach. Uniformed men stand over the corpse, murmuring in low voices. They read the name tag stitched neatly inside the tunic: Major William Martin, Royal Marines. The briefcase remains locked. It bears the insignia of the British Admiralty. Inside there are rumors of letters, maps, secret papers. No one knows what yet. But one thing is certain. Whatever this dead man carried, someone will want to read it. The body is taken to the morgue in Huelva. Spanish intelligence officers, operating under Axis influence, notify the German WWII, the Third Reich's military intelligence service. Within hours, cables fly between Madrid and Berlin. A British officer's body recovered off the Spanish coast. Briefcase secured. Possible courier. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, head of German intelligence, orders an immediate investigation. Hitler himself is informed. A drowned British courier. A locked briefcase. A potential window into Allied plans. Berlin smells opportunity. And yet, nothing about this body is ordinary. His clothes are too perfect. His watch stopped at a time that doesn't match the tides. His wallet holds theater tickets, a photograph of a fiancée, and a love letter signed Pam. Every detail whispers authenticity, and yet something feels rehearsed. The Germans don't know it yet, but they're staring at a ghost, an elaborate fiction built by British intelligence to fool them. The man they're about to trust with their war plans never drew a single breath as Major William Martin. The real story begins hundreds of miles away, in a secret London basement filled with cigarette smoke and whispered ideas. There, two intelligence officers had spent months designing the impossible. A plan so absurd, so grotesque, that only desperation could have birthed it. They intended to turn a dead man into the most convincing liar in history. And if it worked, Hitler himself would believe the lie. This was Operation Mincemeat. The corpse floating off Spain was not a casualty of war. He was the weapon. But before the man in the water could change history, the British had to find him. Someone who could die again, convincingly, for king and country. London, early 1943. The war in Europe has entered its cruel middle act. The Allies have won in North Africa, but the next step, invading continental Europe, remains an unsolved problem. Everyone knows what must come next, the push into southern Europe through the Mediterranean. But there's one obvious target: Sicily. Even Churchill admitted it. He called it the soft underbelly of Europe. And that was precisely the problem. If it was obvious to the Allies, it was obvious to Hitler too. The British knew that if they landed on Sicily openly, they'd meet a wall of tanks, mines, and machine guns. They needed to convince the Germans that they were going somewhere else. Somewhere that would make sense, but not too much sense. In an underground office on 54 Broadway, home to MI5's 20 Committee, two men sat surrounded by maps, typewriters, and empty coffee mugs. Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montague, a sharp, methodical naval officer, and Flight Lieutenant Charles Chumley, a lanky, odd RAF intelligence man with a nervous energy. Their task: to invent lies, but lies that would survive interrogation, examination, and suspicion. The 20 Committee's motto was grimly ironic: double cross. Their work was turning deceit into strategy. But deception had its limits. How do you plant false information in a war where both sides intercept everything? How do you get your lie inside the enemy's mind, and make him trust it? Then one night, a strange old memo resurfaced, an idea born out of wartime dark humor. It was called the Trout Memo. Written in 1939, it compared deception to trout fishing. The trout fisher casts his fly, and sometimes it's a corpse. A corpse. A dead man carrying false papers. It sounded insane. But as Montague read the memo aloud, Chumley leaned forward and whispered, "Why not? Why not make it real? They began sketching it out. If they could find a body, dress it as a Royal Marine courier, plant convincing documents about a fake invasion, and have it accidentally wash ashore where German agents operated, they might just make Hitler believe the Allies were heading to Greece instead of Sicily. The plan had everything a commander should reject. It was macabre, implausible, and dependent entirely on coincidence. And yet, the more they talked, the more it made sense. A body carried by the sea. A locked briefcase with secret letters. Spain, officially neutral but riddled with German spies. It was morbid genius. They took the idea to Admiral John Godfrey, head of British Naval Intelligence, and Ewan Montagu's superior. He frowned at the plan, then asked one question: "Can you make the documents convincing enough for the Führer to believe them?" Montagu said, "We can make the papers real. But the man must be real too." That became their obsession, creating not just a cover story but a life. Every detail, his name, his habits, his love letters, even the receipts in his wallet, had to feel authentic. They called him Major William Martin, Royal Marines. A man who never lived, but would have to die perfectly. By March 1943, the plan was officially approved. Codename, Operation Mincemeat. Montagu noted dryly, "If we fail, it will be the most expensive funeral in history." Still, they needed a body. A man whose death could be explained by drowning, without bullet holes, broken bones, or autopsy contradictions. 4 weeks, they searched morgues, hospitals, and coroners' records under total secrecy. London was full of the dead, but few could die believably enough for the plan to work. Finally, on a cold morning in January, a coroner from St. Pancras called with a possibility. A man had died quietly, anonymously, no family, no claim, no one to ask questions. His name was WWII Michael. A Welsh laborer, 34 years old. Homeless. Poisoned accidentally by eating bread laced with rat poison. His death had gone unnoticed. But in it, Montagu saw a way to change the course of the war. He told the coroner, "We'll give him a name. We'll give him a purpose." And so began the transformation of a forgotten man into one of the most successful spies who ever lived. A spy who would never breathe, never speak, and yet deceive an empire. But first, they had to make GONDWR Michael disappear, and Major William Martin come alive. The body of GONDWR Michael lay in the cold stillness of St. Pancras mortuary. No family claimed him. No one asked where he had gone. He was a man forgotten by his world, until British intelligence came looking for a ghost. Ewan Montagu stood over the slab that morning, the air thick with disinfectant and frost. He didn't speak for several seconds. Finally, he said to the coroner, "He'll do." There was no triumph in his tone. Only a quiet understanding that they were about to ask this nameless man to serve a final, unthinkable purpose. They had found their body, now they needed to turn him into someone else. The coroner recorded the death as phosphorus poisoning. But Montagu and his small team rewrote the story. To the world, this was now Major William Martin, Royal Marines, born 1907, educated at St. John's, a staff officer carrying sealed Admiralty papers on an urgent mission. Everything that followed was theater. And every prop had to be perfect. The team built Major Martin's life detail by detail. They started with the essentials: identification papers, service number, official ID card, military tags. Then came what Montagu called the pocket litter, the personal items that make a man believable. A keychain with scratches of wear. A silver cross on a chain. The receipt for a new shirt, purchased on Oxford Street. A letter from his father about that overdraft, "Do try to be careful." And finally, the one detail that gave Major Martin a heartbeat: a fiancée. Her name would be Pam. A secretary working at the Ministry of Information. They needed her handwriting, her tone, her affection. One of Montagu's secretaries volunteered to write the letters, romantic, but formal enough to fit an officer's life. The first began simply: "My dearest Bill, I can't help thinking of you. It feels so dull without you here. Even the flat seems empty. Do hurry back. Love always, Pam." The letter was folded, creased, and slipped into his wallet alongside a photograph of a smiling woman in a summer dress. It wasn't real love, but it looked exactly like it. Montagu often said later, it was the small details that would fool them. Not the secrets, the humanity. Each new addition made the lie more fragile, not stronger. Because every forged life has one fatal truth. One inconsistency, one error, and the illusion collapses. They practiced signing his name. They rubbed the paper with graphite to make the ink appear aged. They wore the uniform themselves to ensure the creases were natural. They scuffed his shoes with London dust, then sealed them to preserve the mark. Every hour they spent made the deception more dangerous. They weren't just fooling the Germans now, they were fooling time, nature, and death itself. But there was one problem. A corpse changes. It decomposes. Every hour it remains in storage, the plan decays with it. They needed to keep the body frozen, intact, and ready for its final journey. So Montague arranged for GONDWR Michael, now Major William Martin, to be stored in a sealed metal canister packed with dry ice. On the outside they stenciled simple words, "Handle with care, optical instruments." Only a handful of people in Britain knew what was really inside. The deception now had a name, a uniform, a history, and a lover. All it needed was a destination. Spain was chosen for one simple reason: neutrality. It was the perfect theater, officially neutral but crawling with German informants and abwehr agents. If a British officer washed ashore there, the documents would almost certainly pass into German hands. The mission was risky, fragile, and absurd. One mistake, and the entire operation would expose itself as murder, not misdirection. Montague stared at the finished dossier, identity cards, forged orders, letters, and personal effects. He closed the briefcase and whispered, "God forgive us if this doesn't work." The next step would take their dead officer to sea, and into history. On a fog-drenched night in April, a submarine waited quietly off the coast of Scotland. Inside its hold lay a man who would soon invade Hitler's imagination. April 17, 1943. A small crowd gathers in the shadows of Holy Loch, Scotland. The wind cuts cold across the bay, carrying the faint smell of fuel and salt. A Royal Navy submarine, HMS Seraph, sits ready at the dock, silent, black, anonymous. Lieutenant Bill Jewell, a calm man with sharp instincts, steps out onto the deck. He has his orders sealed in an envelope. He opens them only once the submarine dives. The words inside are short, clinical, impossible. Deliver container to prearranged coordinates. Open. Release contents into sea. Maintain silence. Inside the canister lies Major William Martin, Royal Marines. Dead 3 months. Yet about to perform his most important mission. The crew knows nothing. They are told only that the container holds weather instruments. But sailors are superstitious men, and they whisper among themselves, "The chill that seeps from that steel drum feels too human." Below deck, the engineers adjust the dry ice valves. The hiss fills the cramped air, echoing like breath. Montague's letter lies sealed inside the briefcase chained to the wrist, marked private and personal. When the submarine finally submerges, silence wraps around the crew. Jewell moves carefully through the corridor, his boots clicking against the metal floor. He passes the canister and pauses for a moment, a brief acknowledgement that he's carrying something stranger than war itself. For 8 days, HMS Seraph travels south, undetected, through cold Atlantic currents. Every vibration feels heavier than usual. Every creak in the hull reminds them what rides beneath. Meanwhile, in London, Montague and Chumley wait by the radio, chain-smoking their nerves into ash. They know the plan is mathematically flawless, but nature does not obey mathematics. What if the current drifts the body the wrong way? What if Spanish officials turn it over too quickly to the British consulate? What if the papers remain unread? So many variables. So many places for the illusion to die. April 30, 1943, 4:30 a.m. off the coast of Huelva, Spain. The submarine surfaces. The sea is calm, glimmering under the half-moon. Jewell orders the canister lifted. The men obey, hands trembling. They place it gently on the deck. Jewell reads the final instruction. Ensure the body drifts toward shore. Attach life jacket. Place personal effects accordingly. They unseal the lid. A rush of cold vapor spills out. Inside, the figure of Major Martin lies perfectly preserved, uniform crisp, skin pale as marble. The crew stands motionless. They realize suddenly what kind of mission this is. Jewell breaks the silence. "Let's do our duty, gentlemen." They fit the life jacket, secure the briefcase chain, and carry the body carefully to the edge. Jewell kneels, whispering something no one else can hear. Then they release him. The corpse slides into the dark water, floating gently on the tide. For a moment, it looks as though he's alive again, drifting peacefully, waiting for dawn. Then the waves take him, pulling him toward the Spanish coast. Jewell writes in his log, "Operation Mincemeat completed. Body committed to the sea at 4:30 hours. God help us all." The submarine submerges, disappearing into the depths. Behind it, the lifeless figure drifts slowly, rocking with the motion of the tide. At sunrise, fishermen from Huelva head out to sea. They spot something glimmering just below the surface. A shape tangled in seaweed. A flash of metal. A briefcase chain. They pull him aboard. The deception has begun. By the end of that day, the Spanish authorities will have the body. By the next, the German intelligence network will know. And within weeks, Hitler's entire Mediterranean command will be chasing ghosts across the wrong sea. But for now, the waves roll softly around the man who never lived, a corpse carrying the weight of an empire's hope. In Berlin, the cables would soon buzz with news of a drowned British courier. But first, the body had to convince the living. By midday, the news reached the British embassy in Madrid. A drowned officer had been found on the coast of Huelva, uniform intact, identification clear, a briefcase still chained to his wrist. Exactly as planned. Spanish officials reported that the body was discovered by local fishermen and turned over to the naval command. It was only a matter of time before the Germans learned of it, and that was precisely what the British wanted. Within hours, word spread quietly through the diplomatic circles of Madrid. At the German embassy, a man named Adolf Kloss, the WWII's senior agent in Spain, received a coded message. British officer recovered off Huelva. Documents of importance secured. Kloss acted immediately. He knew that Spain was officially neutral but ideologically friendly to the Axis. He arranged for his contacts in the Spanish Navy to photograph the contents of the briefcase before it was returned to the British consulate. The next day, the body of Major William Martin was laid out for autopsy. Spanish medical officers noted the details. Uniform, condition, water in the lungs, everything matched a man who had drowned at sea. The deception was holding. Meanwhile, back in London, Ewan Montague and his team waited anxiously for confirmation. They had done everything possible, forged documents, pocket litter, even small stains of rust and salt on the papers to mimic seawater damage. Now the outcome was out of their hands. It was in the hands of the enemy. In Madrid, the briefcase was secretly opened under the supervision of German sympathizers. Inside were 3 documents. A letter from General Sir Archibald Nye, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, addressed to General Alexander, Commander of British forces in North Africa. A letter from a naval commander referencing landing craft shortages in Operation Brimstone, implying Sardinia as the next invasion target. A personal note casually mentioning Greece as a major concern. The genius of the deception lay in its mundanity. No bold proclamations, no obvious secrets. Just the quiet, bureaucratic chatter of officers discussing operations in passing. That's what made it believable. The Germans read and reread the letters. The handwriting matched British military style. The phrasing was casual, authentic, and perfectly consistent with Allied correspondence. Admiral Canaris, head of the WWII, sent an urgent report to Berlin. Documents from British couriers suggest planned invasion of Greece and Sardinia. Sicily referenced only as diversion. The deception was working, but still fragile. If the British pressed too hard for the paper's return, the Germans might smell the trap. So London did the opposite. They sent polite diplomatic messages to Spain, requesting the documents back at their earliest convenience. No urgency. No panic. Just the right amount of restraint. It was a psychological chess move. The Germans, sensing the British were being careful, concluded the papers must be genuine. By early May, the documents had been examined, photographed, and sent to Berlin. Hitler himself read them on May 12. He underlined key phrases, nodded slowly, and remarked, "It is as I suspected. The enemy will strike through Greece." Orders followed immediately. 2 panzer divisions redirected to the Balkans. Minefields expanded across the Greek coast. Sardinia reinforced. And in the Mediterranean, U-boat patrols shifted north, away from Sicily. From London to Cairo, the Allied intelligence network held its breath. Bletchley Park waited for one signal, proof from intercepted German communications that the bait had been swallowed whole. For 6 days silence. Montague barely slept. Chumley chain-smoked in the corridor, pacing the same few feet for hours. Then one morning a message arrived from Bletchley Park's Hut 3. Ultra Decrypt confirms enemy movement. Sardinia and Greece reinforced. Sicily de-emphasized. Montague read the telegram twice. His hands trembled. He smiled, not out of joy but disbelief. "It worked," he whispered. "God help us, it worked." The deception was complete. A corpse from a London morgue had just changed the course of the war. But the men who planned it couldn't celebrate yet. Because if even one German officer began to doubt, the illusion would collapse, and the invasion would fail. The documents had reached Hitler's desk. But could a single drowned man really keep the Führer fooled? May 1943. London. In a basement beneath Whitehall, a telephone rings in the early hours of the morning. A clerk answers, listens, then runs down the hall shouting one word, "Ultra." Ewan Montague looks up from his desk, his cigarette halfway to his lips. The decrypted message from Bletchley Park has arrived. It's short, precise. Enemy now confident Greece is the main Allied objective. Sardinia also reinforced. Sicily dismissed as faint. Montague reads it twice. His hand trembles. He passes it to Charles Chumley, who reads it in silence. Then he grins for the first time in weeks. It worked. In Berlin, Hitler issues direct orders. Transfer 1st Panzer Division to Greece. Strengthen 15th Army in the Balkans. Maintain observation of Sardinia. 4 months, the Germans had been convinced the Allies would strike Sicily. Now, thanks to one corps, the entire Axis command structure has pivoted away from reality. Hitler even cancels troop transfers from France to Sicily, believing the real invasion will hit the Peloponnese. The deception has climbed from the waves of Spain into the mind of the Führer himself. In London, the atmosphere shifts from disbelief to exhilaration, the strange joy of those who know they've pulled off the impossible. But Montague's face remains thoughtful. He knows the true test has yet to come. The invasion of Sicily, Operation Husky, is only weeks away. If the Germans still believe in the fake plans when the first Allied troops land, thousands of lives could be saved. If not, the beaches of Sicily will run red. He calls his superior, Admiral Godfrey. "Sir, the Germans have reinforced Greece." Pause. Godfrey replies, "Then the dead man has done his job." And yet, secrecy remains absolute. Only a handful of people in all of Britain know what has just happened. Even Churchill is told in cautious understatement. Mincemeat swallowed whole. Churchill reportedly grinned when he read the cable. Not only swallowed, he said, but digested. As the invasion nears, the results become undeniable. Aerial reconnaissance shows German divisions redeploying to the Balkans. Italian defenses in Sicily remain thin, disorganized, expecting only small raids. On July 9, 1943, Operation Husky begins. The largest amphibious invasion ever mounted in the Mediterranean. 3,000 ships. 160,000 men. Sailing toward an island Hitler believes is a diversion. The landings meet resistance, but not what had been feared. German reinforcements arrive late, scattered, confused. By the end of July, Allied forces have taken Palermo. Within weeks, the island is secure. Sicily falls and Mussolini's government collapses soon after. And in London, deep in the files of MI5, a note is quietly added to the Operation Mincemeat dossier. Outcome, success. Objective achieved. Enemy strategic deployment diverted. But Montague can't celebrate openly. He writes in his diary that night, "The dead man has saved more lives than any soldier on the front. And no one will ever know his name. For now, the world believes in Major William Martin. His death is still listed in the rolls of the Royal Marines. His grave still stands in Huelva, Spain, marked with flowers from locals who think he died honorably. Only a few men in London know that Major Martin never existed. That his briefcase, his letters, his love, all were the invention of sleepless minds and steady hands. The greatest act of deception in modern warfare is complete. But for Ewan Montague and his team, success brings a strange emptiness, a quiet guilt that lingers long after victory. Because to save the living, they had to use the dead. Spain had buried him with honors. The Germans had believed in him. But who was he really? And how long could Britain keep his secret? Summer 1943. The beaches of Sicily are quiet now. The invasion has succeeded. The deception has done its job. But back in London, in a small office deep beneath Whitehall, the men who made it possible sit in silence. Ewan Montague leans back in his chair, the room heavy with smoke. On the table before him lies a thin brown folder stamped mincemeat, most secret. Across from him, Charles Chumley stares at nothing in particular. They've won. But it doesn't feel like victory. Montague closes the folder gently. "He did it," he says quietly. Chumley nods, but his voice is distant. "Yes, the dead man." There's a pause, the kind that lingers when triumph and guilt occupy the same space. 4 months, Major William Martin has existed as a real person in military records, his name printed in obituaries, his sacrifice mentioned in dispatches. But he never lived. His grave in Huelva, Spain is real, a small plot shaded by olive trees, overlooking the sea. The Spanish buried him with full military honors, unaware that the man they mourned was a fiction. The British ambassador even laid flowers on behalf of the Admiralty. The inscription reads, William Martin, Major, Royal Marines. Served his king and country. 1907 to 1943. Locals visit the site, placing wreaths on his tomb, believing him to be one of the brave dead. They could never know that the man beneath the stone was a Welsh drifter named WWII, a man who died in loneliness and was reborn as legend. Montague visits Westminster Abbey one Sunday and stands in the quiet of the nave. All around him are memorials to heroes, pilots, sailors, soldiers. He thinks of Major Martin and how none of them will ever know his truth. He writes in his diary that night, Our success is a secret that must die with us. He has no family to remember him, no name that will outlive the lie. Perhaps that is the greatest tragedy of all, that the most effective spy of this war never drew a breath. Back in Spain, the British consulate quietly ensures the grave is maintained. Spanish gardeners water the flowers each week. Children from the village leave small wooden crosses and seashells. To them he is a hero who washed ashore with the tide. And in Berlin, long after the Sicilian defeat, German intelligence files still list Major Martin as a confirmed British courier, lost in duty. They never discovered the deception. It's a strange kind of immortality, to be believed in by both sides of a war. Cholmondeley transfers to another division. Montague continues his intelligence work. Neither ever speaks publicly about the operation. To the world, it's as though Major Martin had always existed. But behind the quiet walls of British intelligence, the success becomes legend. The perfect deception, born from desperation and executed with precision. Years later, when the war is over, Montague writes in his private notes, There are victories that bring celebration and there are victories that bring silence. Mincemeat belongs to the latter. He never forgets the face of WWII, nor the chill of the morgue, nor the absurdity of how death became a tool of mercy. In the end, he understood what so few did, that the real line between life and death is not always drawn by fate, but sometimes by imagination. Decades later, when the world finally learned the truth, the name Major William Martin would take on a second life, and the man beneath the uniform would finally be given back his own. For nearly a decade after the war, the secret of Operation Mincemeat remained buried as deeply as the man himself. Official documents were sealed. Reports redacted. Even the grave in Spain stood untouched, still marked Major William Martin, Royal Marines. But time, like the tide, erodes all secrets. By the 1950s, fragments of the story began to surface. Journalists caught whispers of a body used in deception. Rumors drifted through veteran circles of a mysterious British officer who had never truly lived. Ewan Montague, still bound by the Official Secrets Act, sought permission to tell a controlled version of the truth, to correct the growing myths without revealing every classified detail. In 1953, he published his account under a new title, The Man Who Never Was. The book became an international sensation. Readers were captivated by the audacity of it all, a spy operation carried out by a corpse. In 1956, it was adapted into a major film, also called The Man Who Never Was, with actor Clifton Webb portraying Montague himself. But even then, one question lingered: who was the man on the slab? For decades, no one outside British intelligence knew. His real name remained classified. His true story lost to history. Until 1996. That year, the British government quietly declassified the Mincemeat files. Within them lay the answer. Major William Martin, Royal Marines, was in truth WWII, a homeless laborer from Aberbargoed, Wales. He had lived a short, invisible life, one that seemed destined to be forgotten. Born in 1909, he lost both parents young and drifted to London, struggling to survive the poverty of wartime Britain. In January 1943, desperate and starving, he ate bread laced with rat poison left in an abandoned building. He died alone. No one claimed his body. Until Ewan Montague did. When the truth became public, the story took on a new weight. The world finally knew the name behind the fiction. A man who never fought, never served, and yet altered the course of a global war. In Huelva, Spain, the grave was updated. The inscription changed, by order of the British government, to read, WWII, who served as Major William Martin, Royal Marines. Visitors began to leave flowers again, now not for a myth, but for a man. The locals who had long tended the site felt pride, that their small town had played a role in a story that fooled empires. Historians debated for years whether Operation Mincemeat alone had decided the Sicilian campaign. But that argument no longer mattered. Because the story of WWII wasn't about victory. It was about redemption, a forgotten soul given meaning in the most unexpected way imaginable. Montague lived to see his work praised, studied, and replicated. But when asked later in life whether he ever felt remorse, he said something remarkable. He did not die in vain. He died twice, once in loneliness and once in service. The second death gave the first a purpose. The files revealed more than military details. They revealed humanity behind espionage, the compassion of those who gave dignity to a man the world had ignored. And for WWII, that dignity endured. His grave to this day remains a site of quiet pilgrimage. Tourists, veterans, and historians still stop to read the name and the words beneath it, the man who never was. But those who linger long enough notice the smaller line now carved below, WWII, at last remembered. The deception had ended long ago, but its final act, the restoration of truth, had taken more than half a century. And yet, even with his name restored, the operation that made him immortal would cast a long shadow, reshaping how nations fight wars not with bullets but with belief. The Second World War ended in 1945, but the ripples of Operation Mincemeat never stopped moving. What began as a single desperate trick became the blueprint for a new kind of warfare, one fought with belief. In the years that followed, Allied intelligence officers studied the operation in secret. Its success had proven something terrifying and beautiful, that perception could move armies more effectively than tanks. The architects of deception realized that facts alone don't win wars. What wins is control of imagination. Ewan Montague's operation became a doctrine. Its fingerprints appeared in every major deception that followed, from D-Day's Operation Fortitude, which created entire phantom armies of inflatable tanks and fake radio traffic, to the Cold War's elaborate disinformation campaigns. Psychological warfare had found its proof of concept in a drowned man off Spain. British and American intelligence officers began to see deception not as trickery, but as strategy. They called it the art of controlled narrative, a phrase that would outlive them all. Decades later, the files of the 20 Committee were declassified. Historians uncovered layers of coordinated deceit that most citizens never knew existed. False troop manifests, dummy aircraft on English fields, radio operators transmitting entire fake regiments from thin air. And it all traced back to the day Britain decided that the most powerful spy in Europe would be a corpse. The Germans, after the war, admitted how deeply the ruse had worked. Captured officers confessed they had fully believed the Major Martin documents. One intelligence report found in Berlin read simply, Allied intentions appear directed at Greece, Sicily to be considered a diversion. That single line had redirected 90,000 men. Even after defeat, the Abwehr never learned the truth. Admiral Canaris, the man who first sent the documents to Hitler, was executed by the Nazis in 1945, accused of treason. He died never realizing that the briefcase that convinced him was filled with fiction. Operation Mincemeat was more than a deception. It was the moment modern espionage grew teeth, when wars ceased to be about armies alone, and became contests of narrative control. By the 1960s, military academies taught it as case study. By the 1980s, its methods appeared in political influence operations and counterintelligence training manuals. And in the digital age, its lessons, that information can destroy trust and truth can be weaponized, became more relevant than ever. Ben McIntyre, in his definitive book Operation Mincemeat, called it a masterpiece of misdirection, the trick that made the enemy fight ghosts. Even today, the story fascinates historians and intelligence officers alike because it is both absurd and profound. A plan that sounds like madness, executed with surgical precision, and believed completely by one of history's most paranoid dictators. And at its heart was a man who never lived, yet whose story never dies. Visitors to Huelva still find his grave overlooking the Atlantic. The tide rolls in, whispering against the shore where the deception began. It feels peaceful now, as if even the sea remembers. For those who understand the scale of what happened, it's humbling. Because Operation Mincemeat wasn't just a trick. It was proof that the greatest victories of war aren't always won by strength, but by storytelling. And as the waves still touched the coast where he was found, one question endures. Was it brilliance or blasphemy to turn a man's death into the greatest lie ever told? 80 years later, the sea off Huelva is unchanged. The same wind moves across the same waves that once carried a dead man toward destiny. To stand there today is to feel the thin edge between coincidence and history. The fishermen who found the body are long gone. The Spanish Coast Guard station that logged his arrival has rusted into silence. But the tide remembers. It was here that Major William Martin, Royal Marines, who never lived, yet changed everything, began his second life. And it was here that WWII, a man who died alone in London, found a strange kind of immortality. His grave still overlooks the bay. The marble is weathered now, the letters faded slightly by salt and sun. Fresh flowers appear there every week, left by strangers who know his story, and by others who only know the legend. The inscription reads simply, WWII, who served as Major William Martin, Royal Marines. Beneath that, a line added later, the man who never was. There's something poetic in that a man's greatest act could happen after his death, that his absence became his service. When Ewan Montague visited the grave years after the war, he stood in silence for a long time. He later wrote, "I sometimes wonder if he knows, if he somehow understands what his death achieved." He placed a single rose at the headstone, saluted quietly, and left. In the end, Operation Mincemeat wasn't just a military deception. It was a meditation on belief, on how truth is not always about what happened, but about what we can make others believe happened. That's why this story still echoes today. Because long after the uniforms rot and the files are declassified, what endures is the strange, fragile power of imagination, the human capacity to turn even death into purpose. WWII was never a soldier, yet he won a battle. He never met an enemy, yet he fooled them all. And when the war ended, his silence was louder than any victory parade. His story lives on not because of deception but because of meaning. Because somewhere between the morgue and the sea, between anonymity and myth, one forgotten man found his place in history. The sea took him once, but history gave him back forever. April 30th, 1943, off the coast of Spain, a fisherman found a dead British officer with a briefcase chained to his wrist. No one could have imagined that the body in that boat would move Hitler's armies, save tens of thousands of lives, and redefine the art of war. And so, in the end, it wasn't a general or a tank that shifted the course of World War II. It was a nameless man carried by the tide, the man who never was. If stories like this remind you that history isn't just about who fought, but about who was forgotten, don't let this one drift away. Subscribe now. Because next time, we'll uncover another moment the world almost missed. And remember, every story you keep alive makes sure no one truly disappears.